Hi, everybody. I want to talk about building better trumpet sections. And I'm going to share some things that I didn't necessarily learn when I was taking brass methods or even in my own trumpet lessons. These are things that I've picked up over the years in my own trumpet playing and through teaching hundreds of trumpet students. So these are some things that I found to be really helpful and some simple ways of communicating things. Also, I'm going to share some exercises and ways that we sequence these skills together because that's a lot of the work is just learning how do we not only communicate the concepts to our students, but give them a way to practice and develop the skills. And at the end of the video, I'm going to share my biggest pet peeve for trumpet sections and what we need to do better and to sound better. So first of all, basic sound production. And here's, I've taught this many ways over the years. Here's where I've settled in, and I think it works really well. So I'll have even beginner students, I'll have them take the mouthpiece and just start by blowing gentle air through it. Then I say there are two different ways that we could change things to get a sound from that. One is going to be we could use more air. So we're going to start with gentle air and then gradually increase the amount of air we use until it makes a sound. So. And that's one way to do it. However, I kind of push back against the people who always say more air, more air. It's like that's the solution to everything. We can't just always use more air because more air means louder. I don't think there's any way around that. More air is going to give us a bigger sound, which is great, and we need to develop that bigger sound. But we can't just always play louder when we have a problem. Sometimes we have to play soft, and so we have to figure out what are we going to do to play soft with a little amount of air and still sound good. So the other way is we're going to start with gentle air, and then we're going to slowly shrink the opening in our lips until at some point it's going to make a sound. And I'll demonstrate for students like this. And if you get the size of the aperture right, and whether or not I use that word, but if you get the size of the lip opening correct, it's going to make the sound even with a small amount of air. I was trying this with some saxophone players last week because we're trying to get some kids to switch over to French horn. So I was having them do this on a French horn mouthpiece. And they did that, and they were like, that's all that brass players are doing? And I just laughed and said, yeah, that's pretty much all we need to do. And they were like, well, we were told that we needed to buzz our lips and all this stuff. And I think buzz your lips is really bad advice for brass players because we need the middle of our embouchure to be as relaxed and soft as possible so it can vibrate freely. That's what we're after. And the moment we tell students to start doing something active with this part of the embouchure, it's automatically going to create tension, which is really going to work against us. So we need to keep this very soft and relaxed. But I do teach students to just try to manage the size of their lip opening. Small for a little amount of air, bigger for a large amount of air. And never smaller than it has to be. But we need to change the size of that. And we don't talk about squeezing or stretching or turning or anything like that. We just manage the size of the aperture, and that goes a long way. So from there, one of the next most important things we need to do is teach them to breathe properly. And mostly through the mouth, not the nose. The problem with breathing through the nose, along with not really being able to get in enough air, is that when you breathe in through the nose, think about the position of everything in your mouth. Like your tongue is forward, your mouth is closed. All the things that we need to be open and out of the way of the air when we blow out are firmly in place and blocking that airstream. So we need to really get away from letting any of our students breathe through the nose. It's challenging, though, to get a good breath in through the mouth with the trumpet because we have such a small mouthpiece. We have to keep both lips in contact with the mouthpiece. Otherwise, if we try to breathe off to the side or something and then put the mouthpiece in place, we're going to get the placement wrong. So we have to keep the lips there, but somehow open up enough to get a good breath. So what we need to do is keep the lips there, touching the mouthpiece, but open the sides of the mouth and drop the jaw. That will allow us to get in air from the sides, not breathing the air from the trumpet. That's gross. But then getting open enough that we can really get the throat open, and then we can breathe deep, and then we can also be open to blow out, which is huge. And so when we blow out the air, I want students to focus on warm air instead of cold air. And I'll have them blow on their hand cool air, like they're trying to cool off a hot beverage and then blow warm air like they're trying to fog up a mirror. Then I'll have them switch back and forth, and they feel what they are physically changing in order to do that, and how they're lowering and opening their throat and their jaw to get that warm air going. And then I'll show them the difference between cold air and warm air. Here's what cold air sounds like. And here's what warm air sounds like. So hopefully they hear the difference and know that we definitely want to aim for warm air when we play. But that starts with the breath in and opening up everything as much as we can. So an exercise like this one is really great because it gives them a long note and then an opportunity to rest, focus on the breath that they take in, and start a new note. So this is something that we use with first and second year players, just giving them an opportunity to think about the breath, how they're doing it, make sure their lips are staying in contact with the mouthpiece, and going from there. So to really further develop the tone quality, what we want to do in years like 2, 3, and 4 is we want to get a middle range note like G, really sounding good and resonant and open, and then copy paste that sound and that feel to other notes. And Remingtons are a really good exercise for doing that. So here's an example of a Remington that we use for year 2 players. And then we keep doing that through years 3 and 4, something similar along those lines. Just start with a really good sounding G and then transfer that sound to other notes as well. Years 3 and 4, I also like to do pedal tones and just start real easy. As long as their embouchure isn't collapsing when they go to do a pedal tone, I don't worry about it too much, but just trying to get them to open up and get those low notes to come out can really help to open up their sound. Another thing that nobody necessarily ever told me was how important articulation is to sound production on the trumpet. There are lots of things that we can do from an articulation standpoint to really make the rest of playing trumpet really hard. And so if we can get off to the right foot with the correct method of tonguing, it's going to make things so much easier. So I like to start with students playing on their mouthpiece, and this is something that I do with almost all the instruments, but playing on just part of the instrument. Have them hold the mouthpiece at the end with first finger and thumb, put the other hand on their jaw, and I tell them to tongue with no jaw movement. So something like this line. So this exercise on its own almost completely communicates 2 major concepts. One is that they should tongue using only the front part of the tongue, the tip of the tongue, not the back part, because if you're moving the back part of your tongue, you're also moving your jaw, and that's going to cause massive issues. And the other thing is you want to keep your tongue moving up and down, not forward and back. And that's something that you're going to really feel when you got your hand on your jaw. Are you doing it the right way? And for the other major articulation concepts, I like to print them on the page so students can read them. There's something about the clarity that communicates to students, and that's really made a big difference, just having those things in writing. I've told them that for years, but now having that in writing has made a big difference. So we do an articulation line at each level, and you're going to see, some of the same things communicated. One of them is ending notes with the air instead of the tongue. And some students start in with the habit of ending even long notes with their tongue, which is something we need to break that habit. But it becomes more difficult when they start to do staccato. Quarter note is one thing, but then they go to do eighth note staccato, and that's a real challenge. So even in year 2, we work on staccato where they're doing it and not stopping the note with their tongue. So an exercise like this. having this as a basic exercise is something that's really improved things for my students. I've struggled with years to try to get students. This has just created a lot of ease with getting them to tongue and do staccatos the right way. And then kind of the last step is to make sure they're moving their tongue completely up and down, especially when we get into faster notes. Because when we start tonguing faster, the temptation is to keep the tongue level higher, up closer to your top teeth, so you have less distance to travel when you tongue. And that idea makes total sense. But the problem with that is it leaves the tongue in the way of the airstream. So you're not able to get the response and the airflow that you need because the tongue is in the way. So we need to make sure that when we're tonguing, especially fast notes, we're moving the tongue down out of the way. And this is a huge improvement over the other way. As we do this, we also want to focus on relaxing the tongue and let the airspeed drive the articulation. So we're just kind of modifying the airstream basically when we tongue. And so we want to relax the tongue. That's the reason why we need to talk about that is because whenever we're playing an instrument that has some back pressure, like the trumpet or reeds, what often happens is that as we're trying to push that air through, we also tense up our tongue, which does nothing for helping us get air into the instrument, but we do it anyway. And so one of the keys to learning to articulate well is learning to keep the tongue relaxed. And that's much easier said than done. But if we communicate that to students and give them the opportunity to move their tongue completely, keep it relaxed, let the airspeed drive articulation, with an exercise like this, it's going to make it easier. It's also a reason why I think it's a good idea to introduce the concept of double tonguing sooner rather than later. And we do this for all of our brass players. We started in year 3. And this is something that's fairly new. But starting it early, one is it takes a long time to learn to double tongue well. And if you wait for the time when you need it in the literature, it's probably not going to be enough time to develop that skill. And so you need to start it early. But the other thing is I think learning, trying to double tongue is going to encourage students to find that relaxation and just letting the airspeed help the articulation. So that's something that we do. And here's an exercise. Here's an example of what we do in our level 3 for double tonguing. So you're probably noticing that these examples are coming from amplified instrument routines, which is a whole system that I put together this last year. It's over 50 routines. It covers all the different band instruments for years 1 through 4, and it presents what I think is a very well sequenced and comprehensive list of skills for all the instruments. And it has an approach that's uniform from one instrument to the next, but it also allows each instrument to have the skill development that they need. This next concept is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. One of the biggest giveaways for an immature trumpet section is not tuning their low Ds with the third valve slide. I know you've told them they need to have their third valve slides out 1/2 inch or so, and they need to do that to make it in tune. But the other part of that is we need to give students a way of practicing that every day, or almost every day. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is because moving this and knowing when to move it and having the facility to do it well takes practice. But the other part of it is if they're not doing this regularly, this is going to get stuck and it's going to get slow, and then they're not going to be able to do it when they need it. And so we need to have a regular exercise to develop that skill to combine not only Ds and other notes that might use the third valve, but also C sharps and D flats, which are twice as sharp as the Ds. And so we need an exercise like this one to help make sure students are practicing and developing that skill. I also think it's important for trumpet players to learn to use the first valve slide as well. And I use this on E and A in the staff as well as A above the staff. And 2 reasons why this is important is 1 and 2 combinations tend to be sharp. And so we need to extend the first valve slide to lower those. But the other reason are often E and A are the major third of a chord, so which we want to play flat for just intonation. So 2 reasons why we want to adjust that. There are a lot of times I'll listen to high school trumpet players, and they'll play their A's or their E's pretty sharp, and especially if it's the third of a chord, I'm like, ugh, that just doesn't sound good. Like, they need to learn that skill of moving the first valve slide if they've got it. Not all trumpets have that ability, either the saddle or the trigger. But even if they don't have that, they need to learn to manage that pitch with their embouchure. So we do an exercise in level 4 like this. Another really important trumpet technique is lip slurs, and I think this is super important for all sorts of developmental purposes all throughout. So I use these at every level, and just increasing the level of difficulty as we go up. But I think it's really important to learn to do this by managing one thing, and that's air direction. And the way that we do that is through tongue level. So we don't want shifts in the position of the trumpet. We don't want major embouchure shifts. What we want is just to think about changing the direction of the air, because to me, and what I've been presenting to students, a lot of changing registers on brass instruments comes down to just changing the direction of the air. And we're going to do that with our tongue level. We're going to think ah for low notes, oo for middle notes, and e for high notes. And as we do that, we raise and lower the tongue, and we bend the airstream the way that it's going to help us get different registers. And when we play lip slurs, that's exactly what we need to do. And I emphasize to our students that we need to keep the volume between notes consistent. Like I said, we can't just rely on more air or louder air to help us solve our problems, like getting to high notes, for example. We need to learn what to do. So bending the air direction is really going to help us. Here's an example from level 3. And then also, to develop better sounding trumpet sections, we need to have a systematic approach to developing range, including high notes. And so again, I want to focus on air direction and staying open. Another big thing is we want to keep the aperture open. And this is something that took me a long time to learn, is that sometimes we go into the upper register and we clamp down here. And we can think of that as tension and squeezing, but a lot of times it's just like the aperture is just not open enough. And so if you open and keep a bigger opening here, it's going to help you access the high range better and use your air to do that. It's also going to really increase your accuracy. So when this is too small, you're gonna chip notes, you're gonna miss shelves. When this is open, you're gonna be much more accurate. So that's a huge thing to communicate. And then one final technique that we've started systematically incorporating is vibrato. Because at some point, especially in a soloistic type of sound, vibrato is an expected part of the trumpet sound. For legit playing, I like to use a hand vibrato. So I'm just going to gently kind of pull the trumpet away from me. For jazz playing, I like to use a jaw vibrato. And it's just a different sound to me. But to develop this hand vibrato, I think it's important to start by doing it rhythmically so students can feel the different speeds at which they might want to do vibrato, and also just get used to the feel of the volume and the pitch kind of changing a little bit. So here's what we do at the end of level 4. Tap, breathe. Now, I promised I was going to share my biggest pet peeve about trumpet sections, and it has to do with this. Do you know how sharp these mutes make us? Oh my goodness, it's like, it bothers me so much when I'm playing with people who put in the mute, don't realize how sharp it's making them, and then they just play like everything is normal. It's going to depend on your trumpet and your mute, also how much you filed your corks. I've filed mine down quite a bit so that it fits pretty tight in there. It's not sticking out very far. And so that has an effect on how much the tuning is going to change. But if you have time to adjust in the middle of the music, and we don't always have time to do that before or after a mute change, but I always pull my tuning slide out 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch when I put my mute in. And that's what it takes to play in tune with the straight mute. So get with the tuner, get with your straight mute, figure out how much you need to adjust this. It's going to make your trumpet sections sound so much better. But just please, just understand how sharp this can make your trumpet section and adjust accordingly. So I hope that was helpful. Check out more with the instrument routines at amplifiedwarmups.com/routines. Our band students have been using them for about 6 months now, and I can already tell they're making a huge difference just in the overall tone production and the quality of articulation, especially, and just how well students understand basic technical concepts for their instrument. It's been very helpful, and it's made our lives as band directors much easier. Check those out at amplifiedwarmups.com/routines. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you soon.